In the heart of Texas, where the vast plains meet the boundless sky, lies Oakwood Springs, a small town with a population just shy of 5,000. It's the kind of place where everyone knows each other, where doors are left unlocked at night, and the biggest event of the year is the annual county fair. However, on a scorching summer evening in July 2024, this quiet town would find itself at the center of a tragedy that would shake its very foundation and make headlines across the nation. At the heart of this storm was Sheriff Vanessa Carter, a woman who had dedicated her life to protecting her community. Little did anyone know that, on this fateful night, she would become both judge and executioner in a case that was all too personal. Vanessa Carter didn't start her career in law enforcement. She fought her way into it. Growing up in the rough neighborhoods of Houston, she had witnessed the devastation that crime wreaked on communities. Her father, a hard-working construction worker, was killed in a robbery when she was only 12. That tragedy served as the catalyst for Vanessa's lifelong mission to protect others from the pain she had endured. After high school, where she graduated with honors, Vanessa joined the police academy, determined to make a difference. Her instructors quickly noticed her exceptional skills and unwavering commitment, and she graduated at the top of her class. She swiftly moved up the ranks of the Houston Police Department. But city life wasn't where Vanessa saw her future. She longed for a place where she could make a real impact. A place where she could know every face and name in the community she served. When the position of deputy sheriff opened in Oakwood Springs, Vanessa seized the opportunity. At first, the small town was skeptical of the city cop in their midst. But Vanessa's genuine care for the community, tireless work ethic, and ability to connect with people won them over. In just 5 years, she became a beloved figure in Oakwood Springs. When the old sheriff retired, there was no question who would take his place. At the age of 35, Vanessa Carter became the youngest sheriff in Oakwood Springs history and its first African-American woman to hold the position. The town celebrated her appointment, seeing it as a symbol of progress and a bright future. Vanessa's life appeared picture perfect. She was excelling in her career and had found love with Derek Johnson, a local high school football coach. They met at a community fundraiser, and Derek was everything Vanessa had ever wanted in a partner: kind, supportive, and deeply involved in the town. Their whirlwind romance culminated in a beautiful wedding at the Oakwood Springs Baptist Church, with the entire town in attendance to celebrate their union. A year later, they welcomed their daughter, Zoe, into the world. As Zoe grew, she became the apple of her parents' eyes. Despite her demanding job, Vanessa always made time for her daughter, coaching Zoe's little league team, helping with homework, and never missing a school play or recital. Derek was equally devoted, often playing catch with Zoe in the yard or taking her for ice cream after school. To the outside world, the Carters were the perfect family. Vanessa, the tough but fair sheriff, kept the town safe. Derek, the charismatic coach, led the high school football team to multiple state championships, and Zoe, their bright, bubbly daughter, seemed to have inherited the best qualities of both her parents. But as often happens in life, appearances can be deceiving. Sometimes, the brightest lights cast the darkest shadows. As Zoe neared her 10th birthday, subtle changes began to unfold that no one could have anticipated. At first glance, the Carter household appeared to be as perfect as it ever had been. To the casual observer, everything seemed normal, but those closest to the family began to notice subtle, unsettling changes. Vanessa, once known for her warm smile and infectious laughter, had become more withdrawn. She started working longer hours at the station, often missing family dinners. When she was home, her mind seemed elsewhere, her attention drifting. Friends and colleagues chalked it up to the stress of her demanding job. But beneath the surface, there was an undeniable tension that couldn't be easily explained away. Derek, on the other hand, became unusually attentive to Zoe. He insisted on driving her to and from school, volunteered to tuck her in at night, and hovered around her constantly. While some saw this as a father stepping up while his wife was busy with work, others found it somewhat unsettling. Zoe herself, once an outgoing and cheerful girl, began to change. She grew quieter, more reserved, and her teachers noticed a drop in her grades and reluctance to participate in class. When asked if everything was okay at home, Zoe would force a smile and insist that everything was fine. But her eyes told a different story. Sarah Johnson, Vanessa's deputy and closest friend, was one of the first to sense that something was amiss. She noticed how Vanessa would tense at the mention of Derek's name. How she would change the subject whenever anyone inquired about her home life. But every time Sarah tried to approach the topic, Vanessa would shut down, insisting everything was fine. As months passed, the cracks in the Carter family's perfect image began to widen. Neighbors reported hearing loud arguments from the house late at night, and Vanessa was seen sleeping in her patrol car on several occasions. Derek, once a constant presence at community events, began to withdraw from public life. The town of Oakwood Springs, known for its gossip but slow to interfere, began to whisper about what was happening to their beloved sheriff and her family. Was it just the normal stress of balancing a high-pressure job with family life? Or was something more sinister lurking beneath the surface? Little did they know, the true nature of the Carter family's troubles was far darker than anyone could have imagined. July 15, 2024, started like any other summer day in Oakwood Springs. The sun rose early, promising another scorching Texas day. Vanessa Carter left for work before dawn. As was her habit, Derek Johnson prepared for another day of summer football practice. And young Zoe, on summer break, looked forward to a day of cartoons and playing with friends. But fate had other plans for the Carter family that day. Around noon, Vanessa received a call from Zoe's best friend's mother. Zoe was supposed to come over for a playdate, but she hadn't shown up. Concerned, Vanessa decided to swing by the house to check on her daughter. As she pulled into the driveway, Vanessa noticed Derek's car still parked outside. That struck her as odd. He should have been at school for practice by now. An uneasy feeling settled in her stomach as she approached the front door. The house was eerily quiet, too quiet. Vanessa called out for Zoe and Derek, but no one answered. She made her way upstairs, her police instincts on high alert. As she neared Zoe's bedroom, she heard muffled sounds. Her heart raced. Vanessa pushed open the door, and what she saw next would be forever etched into her memory. There, on Zoe's pink butterfly-themed bed, was Derek, his hand where it should never have been, on their daughter's body. Zoe's eyes were wide with fear and confusion, silently pleading for help. For a moment, time seemed to stop. Vanessa felt as if she were watching the scene unfold from outside her body. Then, reality crashed down on her with the force of a tidal wave. "Get away from her." Vanessa's voice, usually so controlled, came out as a primal scream. Derek jumped back, his face a mask of guilt and fear. "Vanessa, I can explain," he said, his voice shaking, but there was no explanation that could justify what Vanessa had just witnessed. In that moment, everything Vanessa had once believed in, her marriage, her family, her faith in the goodness of people, shattered into a million pieces. Zoe, released from Derek's grip, ran to her mother, sobbing uncontrollably. Vanessa held her daughter close, her mind spinning. How long has this been going on? How could I not have known? The man she had loved, the father of her child, was capable of something so monstrous. As the initial shock faded, a deep, burning rage began to take its place. This wasn't just a crime, it was a violation of the most sacred trust. How could he do this? Vanessa's heart thudded with fury unlike anything she had ever experienced. "Zoe, honey," Vanessa said, her voice trembling with controlled emotion. "I need you to go to Mrs. Johnson's house next door. Can you do that for me?" Zoe nodded, her small body still shaking, and fled the room. Vanessa watched her go, the flood of emotions momentarily easing as her protective instincts kicked in. Then, she turned to face Derek, the man she had once loved. The man who had destroyed everything. "Derek, please," he pleaded, his hands raised in surrender. "It's not what you think. I love Zoe. I would never. Don't you dare say her name." Vanessa snarled, her hand moving instinctively toward her service weapon. "Don't you dare pretend to love her after what you've done." In that moment, Vanessa faced the most difficult decision of her life. As a law enforcement officer, she knew what was right: arrest Derek, read him his rights, and let the justice system handle the situation. But as a mother, as a woman who had just been betrayed in the most unimaginable way, all she could see was red. What happened next would forever alter the course of their lives and shake Oakwood Springs to its very foundation. The next few moments passed in a blur of anger and adrenaline. Vanessa would later struggle to remember the exact sequence of events, but the consequences would haunt her for the rest of her life. As Derek continued to plead and make excuses, something inside Vanessa snapped. In one fluid motion, honed by years of training, she drew her service weapon. Time seemed to slow down as she aimed at the man who had once been her partner. The one she had promised to love and cherish forever. Derek, no. His eyes widened in fear as he realized what was about to happen. Think about what you're doing. But Vanessa wasn't thinking. She was reacting to the betrayal, to the violation of their daughter, to the destruction of everything she had held dear. Her finger tightened on the trigger. The first shot rang out, shattering the tense silence. Derek stumbled backward, his face frozen in disbelief. But Vanessa didn't stop. She couldn't stop. The rage that had been building for months, maybe even years, found its release. Bang, bang, bang. The shots echoed through the house, each one a deafening testament to the death of trust, love, and innocence. Vanessa fired until her magazine was empty. 10 shots in total. 10 shots for the 10 years of Zoe's life that had been irrevocably tainted by Derek's actions. As the final shot's echo faded, reality came crashing back. Vanessa looked down at Derek's motionless body, blood pooling on the soft pastel carpet of their daughter's room. The acrid smell of gunpowder mixed with the sweet scent of Zoe's strawberry shampoo. For a moment, Vanessa stood frozen, the smoking gun heavy in her hands. Then, as if waking from a trance, she lowered the weapon. Her law enforcement training kicked in, and she checked for Derek's pulse. There was none. The gravity of what she had done hit her all at once. She, Vanessa Carter, the upholder of the law, had just committed murder. But even as that realization settled in, she couldn't bring herself to regret it. In her mind, she had done what was necessary to protect her daughter. With shaking hands, Vanessa reached for her radio. "This is Sheriff Carter," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "I need units at 1456 Magnolia Drive. Officer involved shooting. Suspect is down." As she waited for her deputies to arrive, Vanessa sank to the floor, her back against the wall. She stared at Derek's lifeless body, trying to reconcile the man she thought she knew with the monster he had become. Tears streamed down Vanessa Carter's face, but whether they were for Derek, for Zoe, or for herself, she couldn't say. In the distance, the wail of sirens echoed, growing louder with each passing second. Soon, her quiet little town of Oakwood Springs would be turned upside down. And soon, she would have to face the consequences of her actions. But for now, in these final moments of solitude, Vanessa allowed herself to break down completely. She had protected her daughter. But at what cost? As the sirens drew nearer, Vanessa, once the pride of Oakwood Springs, sat in her daughter's room. A killer waiting to be arrested. The next few hours passed in a blur of flashing lights, urgent voices, and stunned faces. Deputy Sarah Johnson was the first to arrive on the scene, and the look of disbelief on her face when she saw Vanessa sitting on the floor next to Derek's body would stay with Vanessa forever. "Sheriff Vanessa," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible as she took in the scene. Vanessa looked up at her friend and colleague, her eyes swollen from tears. He was hurting Zoe." Vanessa stammered, her voice broken. "I caught him. I just couldn't let him live after that." Sarah's face went pale as the weight of Vanessa's words sank in. As more officers arrived, Sarah took charge of the scene, gently helping Vanessa to her feet and reading her rights. It was a surreal moment, the sheriff being arrested by her own deputies. In her own home, word spread quickly through Oakwood Springs, and a crowd began to gather outside the Carter residence. Neighbors stood in stunned silence as crime scene technicians entered the house. And police tape was strung across the front porch, once so welcoming. Now a symbol of the tragedy within. Zoe, who had been safely with neighbors, was taken into protective custody by Child Protective Services. The sight of the young girl, confused and terrified as she was led away, was heartbreaking to all who witnessed it. By nightfall, every resident of Oakwood Springs knew what had happened. Their sheriff had shot and killed her husband. But as the details began to emerge, the town's reaction was mixed. Some were horrified by Vanessa's actions, believing that, as a law enforcement officer, she should have handled the situation differently. Others, especially parents, found themselves sympathizing with her, understanding the primal urge to protect one's child at any cost. The case soon gained national attention. News vans from major networks descended on Oakwood Springs, turning the peaceful town into a media circus. Reporters camped out in front of the police station and courthouse, eagerly awaiting any tidbit of information about the case. Meanwhile, Vanessa Carter sat in a cell in the very jail she had once overseen. The irony wasn't lost on her. But despite the gravity of her situation, she felt oddly calm. She couldn't bring herself to regret her actions. In her mind, she had done what any mother would do: protect her child, no matter the cost. As days turned into weeks, more details about the case came to light. A thorough investigation of the Carter home revealed a hidden camera in Zoe's room, confirming that Derek's abuse had been ongoing. This discovery shifted public opinion in Vanessa's favor. Many who had once viewed her as a murderer now saw her as a hero, a mother who had done what was necessary to protect her child. Zoe, still in protective custody, underwent extensive counseling. The details of what she had endured at her father's hands were heartbreaking. But social workers reported that the young girl was relieved the abuse had finally stopped. She asked for her mother constantly, not fully understanding why they couldn't be together. The district attorney's office found itself in a difficult position. On one hand, Vanessa had clearly committed murder. On the other, the extraordinary circumstances of the case made it impossible for many to believe a harsh punishment would be just. After much deliberation, they decided to charge Vanessa with second-degree murder, a charge that carried a potential sentence of 15 years to life in prison. As the case moved forward, the small town of Oakwood Springs would forever be changed by the events of that summer day. As the trial drew closer, Oakwood Springs remained deeply divided. Signs supporting Vanessa began to pop up in front yards and shop windows, and a legal defense fund was established, receiving donations from all across the country. But there were also those who believed Vanessa had taken the law into her own hands and needed to face the consequences. Throughout it all, Vanessa remained stoic. Her only concern was for her daughter, Zoe. She cooperated fully with the investigation, never once denying what she had done. In her first court appearance, she pleaded not guilty, setting the stage for what promised to be one of the most high-profile and controversial trials in Texas history. As summer faded into fall, Oakwood Springs tried to return to some semblance of normality. Yet, the shadow of the tragedy that had unfolded in the Carter home loomed over the town like a dark cloud, reminding everyone that nothing would ever be the same again. The trial of Vanessa Carter began on a crisp October morning, exactly 3 months after the shooting. The small Oakwood Springs courthouse had never seen anything like it. National news networks set up camp outside, with their satellite trucks lining the streets. Spectators began queuing up at dawn, hoping to secure one of the limited seats in the courtroom. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. Vanessa sat at the defense table, looking pale but composed in a simple navy blue suit. Her attorney, renowned defense lawyer Gabrielle Owens, sat beside her, exuding confidence. As the trial began, the prosecution painted Vanessa as a vigilante who had taken the law into her own hands. They argued that as a law enforcement officer, she should have known better than to resort to deadly force without an immediate threat to life. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the prosecutor began. This case is about the abuse of power. Sheriff Carter had a duty to uphold the law, not to act as judge, jury, and executioner. No matter how heinous Derek Johnson's actions were, he deserved his day in court. Instead, he received a death sentence from the very person sworn to protect and serve. The defense, on the other hand, portrayed Vanessa as a mother pushed to the brink by unimaginable circumstances. They didn't deny that she had killed Derek, but argued that her actions were justified given the situation. Imagine walking in on your spouse, the person you trusted most in the world, sexually abusing your child. Gabrielle Owens said in her opening statement. At that moment, Vanessa Carter wasn't thinking as a sheriff, she was thinking as a mother, with every instinct screaming at her to protect her child. Her actions, while extreme, were the result of temporary insanity brought on by the trauma of what she witnessed. Over the next 2 weeks, a parade of witnesses took the stand. Fellow officers testified to Vanessa's exemplary record and dedication to her job. Child psychologists spoke about the devastating effects of sexual abuse on young children. Forensic experts reconstructed the scene, confirming that Derek had been shot 10 times at close range. But the most powerful testimony came from Zoe herself. Now 11 years old, she bravely took the stand via closed-circuit television to protect her from the courtroom environment. In a quiet voice, she recounted the abuse she had suffered at her father's hands and how her mother had saved her. "I was so scared," Zoe said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But then Mommy came in. And I knew everything would be okay. She always said she'd protect me no matter what. And she did." There wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom as Zoe finished her testimony. Even some members of the jury were seen wiping away tears. As the trial progressed, it became clear that public opinion was firmly on Vanessa's side. Outside the courthouse, supporters held vigils and rallies. The hashtag Justice for Vanessa trended nationally on social media. Finally, after 2 grueling weeks of testimony, it was time for closing arguments. The prosecutor made a final plea, urging the jury to set aside their emotions and focus on the facts. "I know it's difficult not to sympathize with Vanessa," the prosecutor said, "but we must not allow our feelings to cloud our judgment. This trial is about justice, about holding people accountable for their actions, no matter the circumstances." Vanessa Carter, the prosecutor began, "The law is clear. She committed murder. Plain and simple. To acquit her would be to suggest that anyone can take the law into their own hands if they feel justified. That's not justice, that's anarchy." In her closing argument, Gabrielle Owens, Vanessa's defense attorney, appealed directly to the jury's sense of humanity. "Vanessa Carter is not a criminal," she declared passionately. "She's a mother who did what any of us would have done in her situation. She protected her child from a monster. Yes, she broke the law, but sometimes there are higher laws than those written in books. Sometimes we must answer to the law of the heart, the law that says we must protect our children at all costs." As the jury filed out to begin deliberations, the tension in Oakwood Springs was palpable. Everyone knew that the verdict would have far-reaching implications, not just for Vanessa and Zoe, but for the entire community. Hours turned into days as the jury deliberated, and speculation ran rampant about what was taking so long. Was the jury divided? Were they struggling with the legal implications of their decision? Finally, after 4 long days of deliberation, the jury reached a verdict. As the courtroom filled for the final time, you could have heard a pin drop. Vanessa stood, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, as she prepared to hear her fate. The jury foreman stood holding a small piece of paper that would determine the course of Vanessa Carter's life. The entire nation held its breath, waiting to hear the verdict in one of the most controversial cases in recent memory. In the matter of the state of Texas versus Vanessa Carter, on the charge of second-degree murder, we the jury find the defendant not guilty by reason of temporary insanity. A collective gasp echoed through the courtroom, followed by an eruption of emotion. Vanessa's knees buckled, and she was caught by her attorney before she could fall. Tears streamed down her face as the reality of the verdict sank in. Outside the courthouse, cheers erupted from the crowd that had gathered to hear the verdict. The news spread quickly through Oakwood Springs and beyond, eliciting a range of reactions, from relief and jubilation to disappointment and anger. The judge, after calling for order in the courtroom, addressed Vanessa directly. "Mrs. Carter, while the jury has found you not guilty by reason of temporary insanity, the court cannot ignore the severity of your actions. You will be remanded to a state psychiatric facility for evaluation and treatment. The duration of your stay will be determined by medical professionals." Vanessa nodded, understanding that while she had avoided prison, her ordeal was far from over. As she was led out of the courtroom, her eyes searched the crowd, looking for the one person she wanted to see more than anyone else, Zoe. But Zoe wasn't there. As a minor and a victim, she had been kept away from the media circus surrounding the trial. Vanessa's heart ached, knowing it would still be some time before she could hold her daughter again. In the days following the verdict, Oakwood Springs struggled to come to terms with what had happened. The town, once known for its quiet, idyllic lifestyle, was now infamous for a tragedy that had played out on the national stage. Vanessa was transferred to a psychiatric facility in Houston, where she would spend the next several months undergoing intensive therapy and evaluation. The doctors worked to help her process the trauma of what she had witnessed and the actions she had taken. Meanwhile, Zoe remained in foster care. continuing her own therapy and trying to adjust to life without either of her parents. The young girl showed remarkable resilience. But the scars of her ordeal ran deep. As weeks turned into months, life in Oakwood Springs slowly began to return to normal. A new sheriff was appointed, tasked with the difficult job of rebuilding trust in the department. The Carter house, which had stood empty since that fateful day, was eventually sold, with new owners eager to erase the painful memories associated with it. 6 months after the verdict, Vanessa was released from the psychiatric facility. Deemed no longer a danger to herself or others, her return to Oakwood Springs was low-key, a far cry from the media frenzy that had once surrounded her. Yet, as she re-entered the town that had once adored her, she knew the journey ahead was uncertain. Her life had been irrevocably changed. And so had the town she had loved and served. The reunion between Vanessa and Zoe, following the trial, was an emotional and private moment, far removed from the prying eyes of the media. Mother and daughter embraced, tears streaming down their faces, tears of joy for their reunion and sorrow for all they had endured. The path to rebuilding their lives together would not be easy, but it was a step toward healing. Vanessa, no longer a sheriff, found herself needing a new sense of purpose. She eventually found fulfillment as a victim's advocate, using her own painful experiences to help others who had suffered similar abuse. Zoe, with the ongoing support of her mother and regular therapy, slowly began to heal. The Carter case had far-reaching implications beyond Oakwood Springs, sparking national debates about justice, parental rights, and the lasting effects of childhood sexual abuse. In response, laws were proposed in several states, dubbed Vanessa's Law, to offer greater protections for children and harsher penalties for abusers. As the years passed, Oakwood Springs began to regain its identity as a small, tight-knit community. The Carter case, however, became a painful chapter in the town's history. People spoke of it in hushed tones, but it also served as a reminder of the darkness that could lurk behind closed doors and the incredible lengths a parent would go to protect their child. Vanessa and Zoe remained in Oakwood Springs, enduring the whispers and stares with quiet dignity. They were survivors, bound together by love and a shared trauma that only they could truly understand. Their story evolved into one of resilience, healing, and the unbreakable bond between a mother and her child. In the end, the tragedy that befell the Carter family became a wake-up call for many in the town. It reminded people to look out for their neighbors, to speak up when something seemed wrong, and to never take the safety of their children for granted. The 10 shots fired on that fateful July day had changed everything. But from the ashes of that terrible event emerged a stronger, more vigilant community. As for Vanessa Carter, she would carry the weight of her actions for the rest of her life. But each time she looked at Zoe, saw her smile, and heard her laughter, she knew she would make the same choice again in a heartbeat. For in the end, she was not just a sheriff, not just a wife, but a mother, and a mother's love knows no bounds. 5 years after the events that had shaken Oakwood Springs to its core, Vanessa Carter sat on the porch of a small house on the outskirts of town. The setting sun painted the sky in hues of orange and pink, offering a beautiful end to another day. Beside her sat Zoe, now a poised young woman of 16, engrossed in a book. The years of therapy and healing had worked wonders, but there were still moments when the shadows of the past flickered in her eyes. Yet, more often than not, those eyes shone with the resilience and strength that had carried her through the darkest times. Vanessa watched her daughter with a mixture of pride and lingering sadness. The bond between them had only grown stronger through their shared trauma. Forged in the fires of an unimaginable ordeal, they had faced the darkness together. And though they were not unscathed, they were unbroken. Life had changed dramatically for the Carters. Vanessa's days as a sheriff were long behind her, but she had found a new calling as a victims' rights advocate. Her own experience gave her a unique perspective, and she channeled her energy into helping other survivors of abuse navigate the complex emotions and challenges they faced. Zoe had blossomed into a talented artist, using her artwork as a form of therapy and self-expression. Her paintings, often dark but tinged with hope, had gained recognition in local galleries. She dreamed of studying art therapy in college, inspired by the help she had received in her own healing journey. As the last rays of sunlight faded, Vanessa's thoughts drifted to Derek. Despite everything, There were still moments when she remembered the man she had fallen in love with, the father who had once doted on their daughter. Those memories, however painful, were woven into the fabric of her life, a reminder of the complexity of love, loss, and the strength it took to survive. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway interrupted Vanessa's quiet moment of reflection. She looked up to see Sarah Johnson, her former deputy and now the sheriff of Oakwood Springs. Sarah had stood by Vanessa through it all, her steadfast friend when many others had turned away. "Evening, Carters," Sarah called out as she climbed the porch steps. "Beautiful night, isn't it?" Zoe, who had been engrossed in her book, looked up and offered a warm smile. "Hi, Aunt Sarah. How's little Michael doing?" Sarah beamed at the mention of her son, who had been born 2 years after the trial. "He's growing like a weed. Getting into everything. You two still babysitting this weekend?" Vanessa nodded, grateful for these small moments of normalcy. "You know it. Zoe's the only one who can get him to eat his vegetables." The three women chatted, catching up on town gossip and making plans. As they did, Vanessa felt a sense of peace wash over her. It wasn't the life she had envisioned for herself and Zoe all those years ago. But it was a good life. They had survived, they were healing, and most importantly, they had each other. The Carter case had faded from the national headlines, but its impact was still felt. Vanessa's law had been passed in Texas and several other states, strengthening protections for children and increasing penalties for abusers. Vanessa herself had testified before the state legislature, her powerful story helping to sway votes. Oakwood Springs, too, had changed. The town had lost some of its innocence, but gained a heightened awareness of the importance of community vigilance. Neighbors looked out for each other more, and the new sheriff's department had implemented programs to educate children and parents on recognizing and reporting abuse. As night fell and the stars began to twinkle in the sky, Sarah said her goodbyes and headed home to her family. Vanessa and Zoe remained on the porch, savoring the quiet moment together. "Mom," Zoe said softly, breaking the comfortable silence, "do you ever regret what happened?" Vanessa took a deep breath, carefully considering her response. It was a question they had discussed in therapy many times, but it still carried weight. "I regret that it came to that. Sweetheart, I regret that you had to go through such a terrible ordeal. But do I regret protecting you? Never. You are the most important thing in my life, and I would do anything to keep you safe." Zoe nodded, leaning her head on her mother's shoulder. "I know, Mom. I wish things could have been different." "Me too, baby. Me too," Vanessa whispered. She wrapped an arm around her daughter, pulling her close. There, sitting together on the porch, mother and daughter, survivors and warriors, found comfort in one another's presence. Vanessa reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. It had been a path marked by pain, loss, and unimaginable challenges, but it had also been a journey of love, strength, and healing. The 10 shots fired on that July day 5 years ago had changed everything. They had ended one life, altered countless others, and sent ripples through a community and beyond. But they had also been the catalyst for change, growth, and a deeper understanding of the lengths a mother would go to protect her child. As the night deepened and a cool breeze rustled the leaves, Vanessa Carter held her daughter close. She felt grateful for the present moment, cautiously optimistic about the future. They had weathered the storm together, and together they would face whatever challenges lay ahead. In Oakwood Springs, life went on. The town had been changed by the Carter tragedy, but it was not defined by it. And in a small house on the outskirts of town, a mother and daughter continued their journey of healing, one day at a time. The story of Vanessa Carter, sheriff, mother, and survivor, would be remembered for years to come, not just as a cautionary tale or a sensational headline, but as a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the unbreakable bond between a mother and her child. In the end, it was a story of love, love so fierce and protective that it had the power to heal, to change laws, and to remind us of the boundless depths of a parent's devotion. As Vanessa and Zoe stepped inside, closing the door behind them on another day, they carried with them the scars of their past, the strength of their present, and the hope for their future. The tragedy that befell them would always be part of their story, but it would not define it. For Oakwood Springs and beyond, life goes on, healing happens, and love, especially a mother's love, endures. This true crime story delves into the tragic events surrounding Sheriff Vanessa Carter in the small town of Oakwood Springs, Texas. It explores the devastating effects of child abuse, the lengths a mother will go to protect her child, and the far-reaching consequences of a violent act of retribution. The narrative follows Vanessa's journey from a respected sheriff to a woman pushed to her limits, her trial, and the long road to healing for her and her daughter, Zoe. It also reflects on the impact on the Oakwood Springs community and the broader implications for child protection laws. Ultimately, this story serves as a poignant reminder of the hidden dangers within families, the importance of community vigilance, and the unbreakable bond between mother and child.